Hello, and welcome to this episode of It's Not You, but Sometimes It Is, the podcast of real leaders talking about overcoming real crap. We love talking to owners, founders, executives, senior leaders who talk about real stories of facing adversity and what they learned and gained from it. And today's episode is with Frank Nardi, CEO of Cloud Coach. We had an awesome conversation around his very interesting journey from artist and designer turned tech guy turned entrepreneur. He had a lot of fun stories and really interesting wisdom to share. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right. Well, I'm really excited to dive in. I have Frank Nardi here, really cool, interesting background, and he is the current CEO of Cloud Coach. Has some great stories for us and a long career of kind of intense environments, and being a senior leader in a bunch of different settings. And now you are a brand new CEO and joining this company to scale. So really look forward to talking with you, Frank. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Meg. This is great.
All right. So my first question, can you just help us get introduced to your company and the problems that Cloud Coach solves?
Sure. So Cloud Coach is a leading SaaS provider of like enterprise productivity, project management, and post-sales processes. So it's built on Salesforce, and it helps companies work smarter as they bring on their new customers, right? So if you think a SaaS company sells their software and then they have to get that software implemented with new customers, we help them do that through our processes. And so by simplifying the project management of that, by creating opportunities for task management and collaboration with those customers, we are then able to help those customers turn really complex projects into happy customers that go live on time, that have time, that achieve time to value. And then we all know that, happy customers that have a great onboarding experience, they tend to stay longer on the software that they chose. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Like I said, I've been here, this is my 40th day. So still getting my head around everything, but it's an exciting product with really great opportunity to help a lot of customers.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people who love being client and customer facing, sales, customer service, also tend to be the people who don't like to spend a lot of time in databases and spreadsheets. And so a solution like yours helps the people focus on people, which is great.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so you're 40 days in. What, give us a little bit of a history and understanding of what got you here. Like, what was your path to this role?
So a kind of strange path, but a fun one. At least I wouldn't change it. I started out in as a creative freelance designer. I did a lot of photo retouching, got into marketing, became a creative director in the print and marketing world. And we'll touch on that because that was a lot of, especially on the print side, was a very old school way of managing people and culture and just the way that they do business. But really got an affinity for software and the tools that we were using as we were growing. And so took a leap into SaaS back in 2014. Started working with some SaaS project management tools back then. We were acquired a couple times actually, and got into some different companies, and each time really looked at how I could move my career upwards into more leadership and take on more responsibilities, but also empower my teams. And so, how do I think about hiring great people, put them in positions to win, and then succeed through them? I think that's one of the biggest things about being a leader is you quickly learn that it's not about your success, but it's about their success. And if they're successful, it's like that reverse flip. And so that people focused leadership kind of got me to a company called Sin7. where I was the first employee in the US. It was a company based out of New Zealand. And we grew that company to probably about, like, I think there are 100 folks now in the US. So we grew pretty quickly over the 4 years I was there. And then that created an opportunity for me to join Cloud Coach. And now I'm looking to help this company scale and grow as we go on this journey. So,
All right. So it sounds like you went from artist to tech guy to entrepreneur.
yeah, I mean, the entrepreneur thing is funny because it's like, I think we're all somewhere like, in our careers, entrepreneurial, right? You're always looking for those opportunities where you see yourself fitting and making an impact, right? And I think, and being disruptive to a degree, like you kind of say, hey, there's something out there that's being done a certain way. I can go in and I can impact that. I can do that better. Whether it be an entrepreneurial creating a new company or create a product, or taking on a company where you see the opportunity to come in and make a real difference and have a positive impact.
Yeah, exciting. All right. So what I'm hearing is you are someone who's been really ambitious and also kind of been through that school of hard knocks that so many of us grow up in. Um, so I have a question kind of on that, like the challenges, the problems, the adversity. What was one of the hardest things that you've been through in your career? And how did you overcome it?
So I would venture to say, if I go back, you say the hard knocks thing. So I grew up in Jersey, or lived most of my life in Jersey, and grew up in the East Coast there, and had my first gig, which was that printing and marketing company. There was a lot of old school ways of handling things, right? And so when you think about high performing cultures and things like that, you don't really think of a um, print shop, right? It doesn't come top of mind. Um, and there was a lot of really good people there. I'm still friends with them, but it was a lot of high pressure, and culture wasn't really a thing, right? And a lot of times, how folks were treated and things like that, you just saw the opportunity to be like, hey, we could do this better. We could just because we're doing more of a manufacturing type of thing, or it doesn't mean that we have to be so um, yeah, old school in our thinking, right? And so I saw an opportunity at that company to kind of bring that the kind of like new culture ways to it. So I had to do a lot of studying, because you can't just walk in and be like, hey, this is how we treat each other here is not that great. We should do it better. People don't really respond to that very well. So, but it was like, how do we create opportunities for people to bring their best selves to the table? And I had to learn very quickly in that role. It was pretty tough, but learned pretty quickly that leadership is about setting an environment, right? If I can start to set an environment where, um, you know, my job is to make sure that environment is healthy, safe, that people can be themselves, right? Then you start to see like people coming in and being a little bit more open and honest and truthful, and you start to figure out, okay, we can root out, this gossip here, or this challenge over here, or this, we can start to, get people focusing on the problems we're solving, as opposed to the problems that are kind of existing there. And I think that helped me understand how to really build cultures early. Because I think as leaders, we can get into this idea that culture is what we say it is, but it's not. It's what they say it is. And so it's what they experience. It's what the team experiences. It's what I experience when I wake up and I come to the office and I turn my computer on, is what is that day like? Um, and so I learned really early on, working in a tough culture, that it's not shiny objects. It's not, jeans Fridays. And we all know this now, but like back then it was like, it's not pool tables and all the startup-y things that we kind of went through. It's people want to come in, learn, grow, get better at what they do. Dan Pink has that great book, where he talks about the three motivators of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? Can
Right.
you
The
give
book
people
Drive. Yeah.
yeah, can you give people those three things? And so I took that with me, and I continue to take that with me all the time. And so that's what I think folks want to do when they come to the office, right? So what do I want to do when I come to the office? It's like, I want to get better at what I'm doing and feel like I'm making progress. Without being micromanaged all the time. So
Yeah.
like, it's not hard in a sense that it's like, we know the things that work. It's hard that we have to be vigilant about making sure that that we're constantly creating those environments.
Right. And if we're not intentional about it, we all kind of get into this survival mode. We're just so focused on getting things done that we forget to think about how it's going. Like, how are people really interacting? And it sounds like you were part of a culture where they weren't being very intentional about how things were going and how it felt, how people were working together. And you, even though you weren't in a position where you were in an executive role to shape the culture, you had to come in and really try and convince them to use strategies that are based in psychology, right? Like Daniel Pink talks about, like, what actually motivates people, what do they want in that environment? And you had to influence that the little print shop, right, to kind of grow up and come out of the old traditional way of doing things and care about how people were showing up for work and interacting.
Yeah, and we made a lot of progress. When I left the shop, we had some really good improvements and really good progress across the teams. So it was one of those things. It was probably one of the harder things that I had to do, but it was one of those things that was super rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question along those same lines. They say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You've probably heard that term, right? We all have these great goals, and we have a vision for what we want the business doing. And then it's the people problems that get in our way and hold us back. I think, every leader on the planet can attest to that. So I like to ask about any specific examples you have of that happening, where culture, the way things were going, was starting to eat your strategy for breakfast, when you're trying to develop and lead high performing teams.
So I have a take on this, because I was a culture eat strategy for breakfast person. But I think the thing that is really important when I read that is it's a balance, right? It's like the balance of science and art. You need both, right? They say that people rise to the level of the occasion, but actually what we find out is that they fall to the level of their systems, right? And so if we go back to setting the environment, part of that environment is having the right strategy and the right plan. And we
Absolutely.
know that, I'm gonna probably hit you with like 15 different quotes here, but you create a plan, but the minute you launch it, it changes, right? Mike Tyson has a quote about this, like, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, or nothing ever goes according to plan, but nothing ever works without one. Like, there's so many quotes about it, but it's true. Like, plans are going to change and evolve, right? But like, we have to build the right systems for culture, right? And so that part of those systems is having the right strategy, right? So if you think about it, like, strategy is not just our business strategy, it's our hiring strategy, it's our people strategy, it's how we onboard them, it's how we train them to do the job,
Right.
right? I know great people who we all know who took a job and they weren't set up for success for
Mhm.
whatever reason. Maybe it be in sales, maybe it be that they weren't onboarded properly. And
Mhm.
so you could take great people and they could have the greatest culture. They could be like, oh, these people are great, super high culture people. And then you put them in the wrong spot and they're like, oh, hate their job, not working out, it doesn't work. So I think it's always going to be a balance of, it's not just the culture eat strategy for breakfast. It's that you need both. You need to have the right strategy and then you need to have the right culture. But I will say is, when I see culture eat strategy for breakfast is, um, it goes back to, I can create the greatest strategy in the world and it's going to change. And it's going to change and over and over and over. And in most cases, you want it to change,
Mhm.
right? You want to iterate forward. You want to be in a healthy state of flux so that you're constantly evolving and shifting with the business.
Mhm.
The culture part of that quote means that you have people that are resilient,
Mhm.
that know how to communicate change, that know how to go with the flow, that know how to live outside the comfort zone. Because the minute your chat strategy changes and you hit a wall for some reason, you best laid plans, whatever, do you have the right people on the team that are going to, okay, that was a hit. We don't like that, but here's how we think forward. Here's how we design forward.
Right.
Or do you have the finger pointing and all the kind of things that can happen when we know that when that doesn't work, right? And so if you have the right culture and you can create the right culture, then, and we all know success isn't a straight line, right? There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be, lose a big customer or see something, oh, I didn't see that coming, right? Or something breaks that you thought was right. Or sometimes you bring on a person, you think they're going to be a great fit and they're not. How does the culture handle those situations? What is our resiliency? How do we collaborate and talk about the things that aren't working well?
Mhm.
Because
Right.
everybody can get in a room and talk about something great, like, oh, we're success, awesome, I do high fives. How do
Right.
we talk and communicate when things are broken?
Mhm.
And how do we actually uncover the root causes of those things? Is a very is a very culture driven thing, and that is a lot of work and a lot of ongoing stuff so that you can continue to adjust your strategy.
Right. Because essentially what you're describing is where culture starts to eat your business results or your business strategy is when people resist change, when problems come up, they aren't resilient, they aren't innovative, they point fingers, right? And you've seen that as being dynamics that are almost impossible for a high performing team to have. Like a high performing team has to be able to adapt, roll with the punches, identify what the problem is, where it came from, and create new solutions and then adapt to that change. And that all of that I just described is antithetical to human nature. Right? We like things to always be winning and working well and the plans to go exactly as they're planned. We don't like to change. We don't like to have big problems put in front of us. So you're describing superhumans, essentially.
Yeah, and it's true, right? Like so we all, what they say, winning cures all, right? Whether it's sports or whatever. Like if you're growing fast, and you're achieving your results and things like that, it can cover up a lot of problems.
Hmm.
But it's how we it's how we address those problems that I think are important.
Exactly.
Um, there's this idea that we talk about all the time, and it's about honoring the other,
Hmm.
right? And assuming positive intent,
Hmm.
right? So a lot of times when things go wrong, we're like, we tend to grade ourselves on our intentions, but we grade everyone else on their actions,
Hmm.
right? And so when we think about it, it's like, oh, this is a mistake, came out of another department. They must not have tried hard, or they must not have, whatever. They should have done this or should have done that. We're very, very critical,
Yeah.
right? But then when it happens in our department, we're very much like, well, we did our best. We tried our
Right.
hardest, but we had this issue and that issue, and we couldn't figure it out, right? So how do we get a culture? And it could feel superhuman, but at its root cause, like if we start to employ some of these things, it can help the conversation. It's like, okay, let's first assume positive intent, right? If everyone's being their best selves and doing their best, then what could be the problem? Oh,
Mhm.
well, were they given enough resources? Did they have enough time? Like you start to pivot as it's us against the problem, not us against each other.
I love that. I love that framing. Yeah. And what you're talking about in psychology is called the fundamental attribution error. You do something that's dysfunctional or unsavory, and I think it's a problem with your character. But when I do that, I was doing the best I could, right? The problem is outside of me.
Right.
And that's how our brains naturally work. So what you're describing is really powerful of essentially being able to flip that paradigm and have people say, all right, I'm going to come together. We're going to win together. We're going to figure this out together. And I'm going to assume that you're doing the best you can with what you've got. And that's actually a really powerful shaper for culture. If you have that as a belief or guiding principle, it can shape a really powerful culture that I don't think anyone comes into work and says, how can I screw this up for you right now?
Right.
We're all
Totally.
trying. Yeah.
But we do feel that though, right? When things go
Mhm.
wrong, that's the first thing we do because it's just these are the things. It's the I think you mentioned it earlier, like what are our humans naturally thought to think, and then how do you interrupt that
Right.
pattern? That's
Yep.
the thing about culture that I think we don't spend enough time on is how do we figure out how to interrupt the patterns that are
Hmm.
um, in the business, in any group that are consistently undermining the progress of everyone,
Yeah.
right? Because if you talk about what we said, like people want to come in, they want to get good at what they do. They want to feel like they have purpose. They don't want to be robots. They want to get mastery. They want to learn and have the autonomy. And those tie together because if I'm not being micromanaged and I have the space to learn and grow and make some mistakes and then come back in and learn and grow and make more mistakes and then come back in, like I'm getting better at my job, whether it be a salesperson, a developer, a leader, right?
Right.
Because there's no finish line for these things. So you want to create that culture, but it's kind of it becomes unnatural when things go wrong because our defaults can be, and not saying it all the time, you begin to see like gossip or assuming negative intent, right? Well,
Mhm.
they didn't try hard enough or whatever. I try hard enough, but they don't like. So how do we disrupt these patterns and how do we create an environment where um, when something goes wrong, we understand it from the other person's perspective, and then we figure out the ways to pivot so that it's not me against you, it's us against the problem. And if
Yeah.
we can get to us against the problem, that's where the productive conversation forward happens.
I love that. Yeah. And that actually brings me to what I wanted to ask you about bad bosses, right? We know that cultures are often decimated by bad bosses and that most people don't quit a job, they quit a boss. So I would love to hear your thoughts and even experiences or stories around what do you think makes a bad boss and are they fixable? Have you seen bad bosses transform and really be able to lead high performing teams? What does it take?
So Simon Sinek had a great quote that said, "Leaders need to be learned. All good leaders are learners." And I love that. I've actually been following his stuff since he started the book, like Start with Why and Leaders Eat Last. Like he's got some really good stuff out there. And I think that, you kind of can learn what good leaders are versus, what you say a bad leader. Um, these are moments in time for me, right? Like you can be a good leader, but there's no finish line. Like
Mhm.
you continue to grow and learn and grow and learn, always be learning, right? I think um, a bad leader is someone who thinks they know it all, right? We've all kind of run into those folks because the team can only run at the pace of the leader, right? And the business can only run at the pace of leaders. So if you're not learning and you're a leader, you're most likely slowing your team down,
Yeah.
right? Because the CEO I am now for Cloud Coach at our size won't be the CEO they need when we triple the size of the business, right? So I even though in this role, I need to learn and grow. I need to scale myself as I'm
Mhm.
scaling this business so that I can be the right person at 3x, right?
Absolutely.
And be prepared for those challenges. And so I think when you say like what makes a bad leader, I think it's if you play everything we just said in reverse or in opposite, it's probably right. You don't create a good vision. Like people don't, there's no authenticity, right? People want to follow people with authenticity. You micromanage, I think is another one. Like if you don't give people autonomy, um, they can't get good at it, right? Um, I think if we've all seen, leaders who are narcissistic in a way that feel like they know it all. Those are kind of folks that maybe they get short-term results, but it really becomes hard to get long-term results and people to, follow. So that I would say those things are top of mind for me. And always be vigilant about it, right? Because we can all fall. I say like leader is a moment in time. Just because I may consider myself a good leader now, doesn't mean I can't adopt some of those negative habits over time, right? So I have to be vigilant and self-aware,
Mhm.
right? Self-awareness is probably, I'll leave it on that one, is probably one of the biggest ones, because you got to make sure you're what is the quote? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. So, like you got to make sure that you're continually self-aware, like, hey, how am I handling this situation? Am I growing through it and doing it better than I did last time? Or am I falling into a rut because I'm super busy and I'm going to micromanage this project? And that's not good, right?
Yeah.
And so um, I would
So
say that.
it sounds like you're really focused on your evolution and learning in this role as a CEO because you know that you're going to have to grow up with this company as it grows. You're going to have to be constantly learning. And sometimes what makes someone a bad leader is when they're not resilient. They're not learning from the challenges, right? They're not very self-aware. And that for you, the solution to that has been a focus on learning and growth always. It never stops.
Yeah. And I whenever I do any coaching for anybody in their roles, it's not just about scaling the business. It's about scaling yourself, right? And how can I be a better salesperson, uh, engineer, customer success 6 months, 12 months from now, when the business needs me to be, and my customers need me to be, and my teammates need me to be, than I am today. And so I always think about that piece of it.
Mhm.
And I think that when you stop thinking that way, um, a lot of things can pass you by, the market, the business, the
Mhm.
needs of the job. And that's where you start to see challenges, right? And so, you know, everything is fixable too. I will say that. Like we are people and we all make mistakes. And I think thinking it's not fixable is probably the worst mistake we can make. So even
Right.
if we're like, hey, I'm a, bad leader is such a, a bad boss is such a strange thing because it's like you could be a really good boss that had to handle something that in a bad way or a way that you weren't proud of, or you're like, man, I should have handled that better. Or you could be a boss that lacks empathy and communication and continually has a pattern. And that pattern is, from maybe how you were treated when you were coming up and you had a boss that did it that way. And so you're just
Yeah.
repeating I'm trying to get into the psychological stuff, but Meg, you got me completely beat on that stuff. But they're like, but you just kind of repeat it, right? But there's still
Yeah.
pattern breaking, right? You can still go break that pattern. You can wake up
Absolutely.
tomorrow and be like, hey, I don't need to approach this with less empathy. I can
Mhm.
approach it with more empathy. I can communicate better. And here are the ways to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's always a moment in time, and we have to be vigilant and see opportunities for us to continually improve and scale ourselves.
Absolutely. I think we've all been that bad boss, if you're honest with yourself. It depends on the day, the person, the situation, the season we were in, but we've all been that bad boss and we all learned, we all grew. I had to get fixed myself for sure. I had to get some coaching. So I love your approach to that. It's essentially we have to be intentional about that growth or we can slide backwards very easily. And that kind of takes me, Frank, to my last question for you is looking forward 5 years in the future for Cloud Coach. What do you see as the need for change in team culture? What do you think culturally is going to take you guys to that next level to where you're really successful 5 years down the road?
So, whenever you join a new company, especially at this level, whether C-level or lead it, you think of three things. You say, or they tell you to think of three things. Is it do you have a good culture? Do you have a good product that you can scale, right? And do you have good, customers that really like what you do and stick around and right? And so Cloud Coach has all those three things
Right.
today. In fact, when I joined, one of the biggest things I said to the team and the board was, I was actually even more impressed with the culture here, like super smart, super talented folks really work together across teams, really there for each other. But that's at, 40 people,
Yeah.
size we are today. And I think one of the challenges that we all have to think about is culture at scale.
Hmm.
So when you 3x a business, 5x a business, as we're planning on doing, you kind of 3x and 5x a team, right? And that team may not all be in the same Fort Collins office. That may be in multiple locations across the globe.
Hmm.
We saw that at Sin7. We started out with a New Zealand office and a small Denver office. And then when I left, I think we had like 8 locations globally, all different cultures. Prague, India, Dubai, New Zealand, Denver, other folks inside the US, Philadelphia. Culture at scale is challenging,
Hmm.
right? Managing a team in an office of 25 people is totally different than managing 8 locations with 300 people.
Right.
So the way I think about it is how do we continue to build on the foundations they have? Like we have this great product, we have this great culture, we have these great customers, and continue to add to it, and making sure that the next 10 folks that we bring into the business enhance the culture, and maybe fill in some of the gaps, right? Maybe we need
Right.
some leadership here, maybe we need some skill sets here, what have you. But if we're not mindful about those next 10 we bring in and then the next 10 after that, then all of a sudden the center of gravity is not the original 40, it's the extra 150, and we've now lost a lot. And the culture is always going to change and shift and grow. You're never going to be the same culture.
Right.
But do you have the resiliency that you had? Do you have the energy that you had? Do you have the collaboration? Does it break down as you scale? Like these are the things that I always think about at making sure that culture at scale is top of mind. And so that um, everyone we bring into the business somehow, and you're never going to be 100% right and perfect on these things, but like how do we make sure that the folks that we're bringing on and the teams that we're working with globally become enhancements to the foundational culture that we already have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can see why they picked you for the job, Frank. You obviously think about this a lot and realize it starts at who you hire. It starts in selection. And I've seen, a lot of my clients who weren't really aware or intentional about who they were bringing into the team. And they brought people onto their team that had very conflicting values and different priorities and guiding principles. And culture fit is everything because culture is shaped by your alphas, the biggest personality in the room. And if you're not shaping it, your alphas are shaping it. And if your alphas are shaping it, they might be super dysfunctional. You might get lucky and you have alphas that are really high performing and know how to cultivate that in others. But like we said earlier, that's not the norm for humans. And so if we're not thinking about this, bringing in the right people and constantly evolving as a team in intentional ways, then our culture is going to start to change in ways that may not be beneficial to our business.
It's really well said. And when you were saying that, another thing that came to my mind is I think especially young leaders, I did this coming up. We tired to hand we tend to hire a bunch of ourselves, right? So when we think
Yeah.
about culture, right, we think about, oh, we're going to hire the next 10 people. So what we end up doing is we hire 10 more people like the 10 people we currently have.
Mhm.
Or I really like this person because I'm interviewing them and they're a lot like me and they like the same things. But when you really start to to do this in a way that's intentional, you try and find the gaps in your teams, the things you don't have. You hire for the white space,
Right.
right? And so a team of 10 alphas doesn't necessarily work.
Right.
Um, so I tend to use this term, and I don't know, I call it the Ocean's 11 strategy. Uh, so whenever I'm putting together, these movies where they're going to do a heist or whatever, they always have people that have different skill sets. And Some guy's always or someone's always the electronics guy who's tapping into the TVs so that we can all go, but then how do you put a team together with different skill sets, with different backgrounds, with different experience, with different ways of thinking and
Right.
approaching a problem, so that as you grow and you see that we go back to the original, like success isn't a straight line. So now we're scaling, we're growing, we got our strategy, we hit a roadblock, things aren't working well. The culture eats strategy for breakfast. That culture needs to be diverse. It needs to come at it with different mindsets and thinking. If you're all the same, then you approach the problem the same and you won't see
Mm-hmm.
the answer all the time. Maybe you will,
Absolutely.
but most likely you won't. And
Right.
so how do you put together a cross-functional, cross-skilled, even within, your sales team? They're all salespeople, but how do they have different mindsets
Mhm.
and different diverse ways of thinking? So then you can go put it all together and have your Ocean's 11 team and then go rob de Bellagio.
I love it. Ocean's 11 team. Can I steal that from you?
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm workshopping it still.
Okay. But you're right. Research says that the highest performing teams that make the best decisions are those with really different backgrounds, personalities, strengths, perspectives. It's the most diverse teams. But the more diversity you have on your team and where people come from, what they believe, what they're great at, and how they think, the more diversity actually creates more conflict. And so there's that healthy tension where we've got a really diverse team. We're making great choices, but we have to be really thoughtful about how we're communicating and working together since we are so different. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, Frank, thank you again for being with us. This was a really fun conversation. And we're going to be keeping our eyes open for Cloud Coach and all the great things you're going to do there.
Well, I appreciate it, Meg. Thanks for having me on. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. Thanks.